Welcome back to the Psychedelic Podcast. Today we have Dr. Stefanie Kleine. Dr. Kleine is a doctor of psychology and transformational coach with over 23 years guiding high performers, leaders, athletes, and founders through the work of becoming, with 9 of those years in the psychedelic space. She holds a PhD in psychology and a master's degree from Pepperdine, and founded the psychedelic retreat center, the Sacred House of Eden, named Retreat Guru's top choice psychedelic retreat in the U.S. Her work has been featured in Bloomberg, the Wall Street Journal, and Forbes. And her new book, which we'll talk about today, is called Be the Work, The Shift from Human Doing to Human Being. And this book distills 2 decades of all of her work into a single move, from chasing worth to inhabiting it. Stefanie, thank you for coming on the podcast. It's a long time coming, so I'm glad you're finally here.
I'm so happy to be here, and it really is a long time coming. I think we've been talking about this for many years, and it's really great that we're making it happen. So, yeah, and I love that. Can I just take you everywhere that I'm speaking, and you can just introduce me? That was perfect.
Okay.
Thanks, Paul.
I love that. Well, we first met in person in Malibu 2 years ago. You helped to support an event that we were putting on, and we've known of each other's works for some time before that, but that gave us a chance to meet and connect. And so we've been sort of having this in process. And I know you were waiting until the book was out to really come on. And so the book is out now. That's where I want to start, in fact, is the book, because I think that'll be a good opener for the rest of our conversation. And your book turns on one shift, right? Human doing to human being. And so for someone who's checked every box and still feels that something is missing, what actually changes on the being level that achievement can't touch?
Yes, that's a multi-tiered question and a lot that I want to share. Obviously, the real bulk of that will be in the book itself, but you can see here that I've literally crossed off do, which is the most common vernacular in the wellness space, psychedelic and wellness in general. Do the work, do the work, do the work. And for me, after doing this for almost 2.5 decades. And then, of course, my own healing journey, which I'm happy to get into, it became very clear to me that transformation happens on the being level, not the doing level. And that's really the premise of the book, but it's also the heart of the work that I do with people. So if we can kind of take it back to decades earlier, so I can share really the origin of the book and Eden and my coaching and my own experience with the medicine is it goes back to a young kid who thought she had everything figured out. Like, I have been a chronic overachiever from about the age of 8. I was actually an Olympically trained athlete. I was a fast pitch softball pitcher. My dad was my coach.
Wow.
And that's like a whole different way of growing up, a very different, unusual, high pressure kind of childhood. I was also really academic. I skipped 2 grades in school and went on, of course, to get my master's, my PhD. I was the one that set the curve in the doctorate program. I did the 2-year master's in 11 months. Like, you get the picture. And I'm not saying that to be impressive. It's really because the point is not the list of accolades. The point is what was underneath it. And from very early on in my coaching career, I was working with top performers. Like, I was working with C-suites, founders, pro athletes, doctors, lawyers, and I'm like barely in my 20s. And I'm working with the highest of achievers. And I think that part of why I was able to sit with them the way that I was, even though I was so young, is because I was one of them. Right. And what I came to understand is that the thing that, like, where we would truly meet, it wasn't just like I had achieved and they had achieved. It was underneath the achieving, like we shared the same root, right? We had been doing, but our being shared a very common wound. And for me, I was a very celebrated, very loved kid. I was in a loving family, but the deepest, truest parts of me were not met. Like, they weren't heard, they weren't held, like the truth of who I was. And that's no fault to my parents. They're great people, but it wasn't their wiring. And I came in very wired for depth extremely intuitive, a sensitive kid. I was channeling by the time I was 6. Of course, I didn't even know what that meant at the time. Um, but my parents just didn't have a language for that. And so I felt unmet. And so my wound was that, and the way that I attempted to feel better about it was that my currency became achievement, right? That was the closest approximation of being seen. The rub of that is that I wasn't actually being seen. The performance was being seen. So I became a very skilled performer, perfectionist, control freak, like all the things that come with that. And it's no wonder that from the very beginning, my clients were high achievers that also shared that same wound underneath. It might not have necessarily been that they didn't feel met, but almost always when you distill it down, it comes to a sense of not feeling enough. Right, and so that's truly the heart of what I healed in myself through medicine and a lot of work outside of medicine as well, a lot of IFS informed work, which is how I practice too. And then also, how I've seen across hundreds of people that same pattern that's running on the doing level, but the wound on the being level. And until that's really tended to, nothing really sticks. Nothing really changes, right? Because we are human beings, not human doings, but we're conditioned to be doings and we're usually rewarded for our doings, right? But then this other part of us is neglected. And so it's just this engine that keeps running and we're never actually like getting to this finish line because everything's going outward and this part is still like it's just not being fed.
For you, what was the moment where that came into your awareness? At what point did you realize, okay, I have been quite successful, right? You've mentioned the PhD at Pepperdine, and being a very high profile softball pitcher, and like even with the Sacred House of Eden as well, like one of the first above ground psychedelic retreat centers. So it's not as if your achievement has quote unquote stopped. You've
Right.
continued to want to show up in a big way and support, but when did the inner game for you start to shift, and what catalyzed that shift in the
Yeah.
inner game for you?
Yeah. I love the language of inner game. 'Cause that's what it is, and also just to the word game, I think that I think that we take life so seriously, not not just overachievers, but just people in general, and it's like we're actually meant to enjoy and have fun, like, this is ultimately a game, and you get to choose how you play it. So, for me, that change really happened with my first medicine journey. So I grew up I'm an '80s kid, Nancy Reagan, "Just say no," had never touched anything, took all the pride in the world of being, like, clean and smart and a good athlete, and when other, my peers were, experimenting with different drugs, I didn't do it, and I was very scared, and I had a lot of judgments around it. So, when I was invited to medicine by one of my very best guy friends, I had just moved to Colorado. It's 10 years ago. I just moved from California to Colorado. It just so happened that he had moved a year prior. We reconnected when we were both in Colorado, and he was in relationship with a woman who held medicine journeys underground, like literally underground in basements and like very hush hush. Like you got to have the secret handshake. It was almost like a psychedelic speakeasy type of situation. And I was terrified. I was so scared. I was the most unlikely person to be there. And so much of me wanted to say no, but I said yes anyway. And I really believe that there was like a deeper part of me that knew I was supposed to be in that room. And and I did it. I summoned the courage and I did it. And I remember us sitting around. There's probably 12 of us in a circle sharing our intention. Why are we there? And a lot of the people there had really traumatic, heavy histories. And I came from a loving family, devoted parents, and I almost felt like, "Do I belong here?" Well, what I didn't know is medicine was going to show me in very, quick order that none of us get out of here unscathed, and it actually really not broke open, because a lot of people talk about their experience like it broke open. For me, I actually melted. That was my experience. I melted, and in that melting, it became very clear the pattern that I had been running my whole life, which was ejecting out of who I actually am and trying to, like, it became like an acquiring thing when really what was needed was more of a connecting thing, and that came through, like, immediately in my first medicine journey, which was remarkable. Remarkable, like, I'm so grateful, and it really did change, the trajectory of my life in the most profound and unexpected ways. Yeah, that's really, I mean, that was really just the very beginning. There's so much more, including, like, what I saw in that room and with other people too, and then kind of the role that I organically took there, just given, like, my history was, like, people started coming to me asking, not for medicine, but to, like, to unpack and ultimately to integrate, what was coming up for them, and so I
Mm,
kinda just moved, like, into that role very quickly and very naturally, and I loved it, and it became evident to me that the most important thing about all of this is integration, and that is what we
mm,
built Eden around. We're
mm.
very big on safety, number 1, and integration.
As psychedelics move into the mainstream, we need trained and ethical professionals who can guide others through these powerful experiences with care, skill, and integrity. And that's what our practitioner certification program is all about. Over 6 months, you'll learn how to coach at the leading edge, combining neuroscience, integration frameworks, and trauma informed practices. This program also includes a transformational in person intensive in Costa Rica, where you'll get hands-on experience with psilocybin mushrooms and connect deeply with a cohort of fellow visionaries. If you feel called to lead in this space, we'd love to support your path. Learn more and apply today at psychedeliccoaching.institute. Or you can find the link in the description. And I want to come back to kind of your approach to that, particularly through Eden, working with high performers. But before we do that, one thing I want to get a little bit deeper into is like this shift, right? The sort of shift from doing to being, the shift into feeling fed, the inner game being fed. One thing you've talked about is sort of grasping versus generative, or grasping versus being generating. Can you talk a little bit about that distinction? And for those, there are a lot of high performers who are listening to this podcast. How can we tell that difference within us? When are we grasping versus when are we coming from an energy that is much more sort of generative and in service of life and creation and, our path?
Yeah, for sure. And a question that often comes up, because I work with, top performers who have tethered their identity very much to what they're achieving. There's a fear that comes up, like, are you going to coach me to not have ambition? Are you going to coach me to just stop? And my answer is no, absolutely not. It's not about that. It's what engine is running you. So I talk about two different types of desire. One is grasping, which is you are trying to prove you are enough. Generative is where you're acting from a place of already knowing you're enough, right? So same ambition a lot of times, same drive can show up very similar in what you're actually doing. But the felt sense of it, like the fuel behind it is so different and so much more fulfilling because you can accomplish, tick off all the boxes and still very much feel that something's missing, right? Because a lot of times what's happening is people are driven. If you've done any sort of inner work, you might arrive at this place of like, okay, I can see my pattern and I can see that I've been chasing worthiness, right? Through a series of things that I'm accomplishing. And I would say, okay, that's a great first insight. But that's by no means the finish line. And I think that's something that the wellness space is actually really missing because then what happens is you're then told, okay, stop chasing these things, grasping for these things outside of yourself, and instead go inward. But then what happens is then people do it's the same chase with a different costume because now they're just doing it inside. Like they're like, okay, what's the next protocol, the next framework, even the next ceremony? And that is exactly the same machine running because it's coming from a place of not already feeling enough. Right, and so we have to tend to that place inside. So what for my journey, my first one that showed me that I actually reconnected to a very young version of myself. I was like 6 years old and I was playing and I was like so full of wonder and curiosity and aliveness and the word like enough didn't even exist. There were no measures, there were no scales. She wasn't impressive, she wasn't accomplished. She was full and alive. And that is who we all are underneath all of this striving, achieving, running, chasing, performing. So the work is untangling that so that we can then get to who are we underneath it before all that stuff started. That's really the shift. And it's not about stopping accomplishing at all. And that's a very reasonable question, for people to have when we start working together. It's really about knowing you're already enough and then moving from there.
And how does that shift or change the quality of someone's experience in everyday life? Like one metaphor that a coach once sort of communicated this same lens to me is it's like, it's like I'm a Ferrari, let's say, and it's like putting diesel in a Ferrari when you're coming from that grasping energy versus when you're coming from a generative energy, that's like premium fuel. It's like you're running clean, right? So she would often describe it as you're running clean. So
Mhm.
when these high performers start to shift from that grasping to that generative energy, how does that show up? How does that impact their well-being? How does that impact, maybe their sleep or their
Yeah.
lifestyle or, their relationships? Like, talk to us a little bit about the sort of secondary outcomes of shifting to that cleaner energy source of generation rather than grasping.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would say like all of the above. Like you named it, it really does have an impact across every domain of your life. Because so we're taught to run this formula of do, have, be. If I do enough, then I'll have the things and I'll finally be okay or enough or at peace or happy. And the formula is completely backward. So what I coach is the be, do, have inversion, which is then starting from being, let your doings emerge from that place, and the havings take care of themselves. So it's completely flipping the whole paradigm. And the result of that is people then your worth, your state of being is no longer contingent or reliant upon a particular outcome because you're already starting from a place of knowing you're okay. You're okay. Like you don't need those things to be okay. And people think that they're chasing maybe worth, but that's actually to my mind almost the trap door. Because then what happens is then you turn it all inward and you're like, okay, and then it can start to look like, like I was saying earlier, all the protocols and all of this, and then you just end up depleting yourself or becoming exhausted or, riddling your whole system, your whole nervous system is still chasing. And so that has a direct impact on your interpersonal relationships. It has an impact absolutely on your sleep, on your entire orientation, the way that you show up in your world. So when you can relax back into the being underneath all the doings and get aligned there from a place of already knowing you are enough and choose from there, everything has much more meaning, more fulfillment, more lasting energy that you can sustain because the other is not sustainable. You might feel a temporary high from accomplishing something, but it's very fleeting because it's all happening on this level and not the actual human being underneath.
And so I want to get a little bit into like then your approach, and this sort of dovetails with integration and psychedelic work. But, one thing that you've talked about on your website, I'm sure is mentioned in the book as well, is this relationship between internal family systems or parts work and we've had, Dick Schwartz on the podcast before. We've had a couple other psychedelic practitioners talking about parts work, but we haven't really had anyone on who is addressing the full spectrum, because not only are you trained in IFS and working with IFS, which I see as more of a therapeutic modality in nature, although it's not explicitly therapeutic, but you're also doing a lot of coaching. And so what are you noticing, when you're working with high performers? How do you as a practitioner navigate or hold when parts work or internal family systems work may be appropriate versus when, proper coaching and sort of getting them focused on what they're creating and building is appropriate? How do you sort of handle that from a protocol or from an approach lens, this sort of balance of IFS with, I suppose, more traditional performance coaching, if you will?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I need to take a minute with that because I don't know that I make a hard and fast demarcation between the two. Surely IFS work is incredibly deep, right? So by no means is every session an IFS session. There are sessions that stay a little bit more on like, because I even feel like when you do IFS, if you like, at least the way I'm doing it with people, it alters your consciousness. Like you drop into a, a little bit of a non-ordinary state, right? And I mean, you can do that through breath and meditation. There's a prayer. There's so many ways to do that. And certainly, I think that when I work with people and do IFS informed work, that's happening as well. So there are sessions that are that, and then there are sessions that stay a little bit more. I don't want to say superficial, a little bit just more topical, right? A little bit maybe more pragmatic. But I don't, but that's a decision that's made like very much in the moment. Like my clients know to show up in the session. My ask is that you show up with a readiness, a willingness, and an openness and an honesty. And so we determine how we work, every time is different, right? I'm not formulaic. I'm not formulaic at our retreats. I'm not formulaic in my coaching, which is great because, having been, this gold star junkie as a kid and very controlled, um, that's not how I work at all. It's very organic. So I think that to answer your question, it's decided, each moment, and it's very intuitive. Like I think also why I chose to be a coach, and even though my training is classical and clinical as a psychotherapist, I chose very early on to be a coach because I gave me the freedom to work the way that I'm actually wired, which is intuition first, framework second. And so I bring that to each session, and it's very much like meet them where they're at, which that in and of itself is so much of the healing that happens, right? Someone that can actually meet you, the truth of you, and be fully present and hold that kind of accepting space. Yeah,
Well, and
did that answer it?
yeah, I mean, let's keep going on it, because I think it's brought up some other interesting things, which is like you have a particularly interesting developed archetype, which is a lot of these individuals who are in high performance coaching roles tend to be quite masculine, overly masculine. Sometimes they are men, but sometimes it's women who are overly masculine, right? That tends to be very prominent in this sort of performance coaching or leadership coaching role. And I think what's very interesting about you, Stefanie, is that you're really looking at how does this sort of embodied feminine archetype with psychedelics as a center point, which is very rare. How are you holding that as this sort of not even a new definition of performance, but a new understanding, a new approach that folks can take who are sick of attempting to, build things externally to compensate for a lack of self-worth, self-love, whatever it might be. So I'm kind of curious to hear you articulate that framework a little bit more. I know we're talking about the book Be the Work, which is that starting point, but how would you articulate this sort of embodied feminine psychedelic informed approach to performance and leadership? And how does that maybe even change how we look at performance and leadership, from the start?
Yeah, another great question. So, to that point, I would say from the very beginning, about 90% of my clients were men. And it wasn't until Eden where that changed. And now I'd say it's about 50-50, maybe 60-40, 60 men, 40 women, because, kind of my area has been, high performers. So, and just the way that the society's set up, that's, often men. But even if it's women, you're right. Like it is a very masculine energy, right? When you're in that, like, striving and achieving and accomplishing and winning, like that's very like exertion and force and push. And that's very masculine. You can even feel that in your body. So when I bring in a different element, just being a woman myself, right? I mean, we all have masculine and feminine, myself too. I think I was largely more in my masculine energy younger, with sports and school and everything. And the medicine has really softened me so I can connect more and lean more into and trust my feminine, which I think is a superpower. So working with men, bringing that energy into the room, early on, it was definitely met with a lot of skepticism, right? Because everyone thinks they kinda have to, like, leave their heart and their feelings at home. You cross the threshold of the office and, like, you gotta put your big boy pants on, male or female, like, that's what you gotta do. And so when I introduce, I mean, we're talking 20 years ago, and I'm talking about what at that time people would call soft skills. My work then became showing them how that actually hits the ROI. Like, how does that hit the bottom line? What do we then see as real results, tangible results, when we are able to show up as humans? Because the lifeblood of any organization or team is people, right? And so people are like, heart beating, alive, feeling humans. So it's met often, initially with skepticism. There's some fear around it. I think that that's just, a conditioning and a programming of our society. And so it's really learning to trust, right? To trust me, to trust the process, and for them to trust themselves so that they can inhabit the fullness of who they are, because we are both masculine and feminine. And if we're chopping off half of us or a portion of us because we're like we have to be masculine, we're really missing out on a lot of gifts that come from the more feminine energy, like creativity. Right, and that then brings in new ways, new perspectives, new point of views, new ways to tackle maybe the same problem or the same challenge. There's just you're then opening up, broadening the scope, the aperture opening to what else could be available that you would not have considered because you shut that part of yourself off. And when people start to do that, they're like, "Oh my gosh, I can see it." Like, I actually have 7 options available here, not just, I'm not myopic, like, it's not just one thing. And when you start to feel that and trust that and get comfortable in that, it's like you would never wanna then give that up.
Right. It becomes intertwined into this new sort of seed of your identity that's being planted within the psychedelic space, which of course then brings up the importance of integration. And so this brings us then to, well, after someone goes through ceremony, they have this high dose experience, right? Let's say they go to the sacred house of Eden, and they're guided or facilitated by you through a journey. What does your aftercare look like for integration? What are the things that you think are really important to honor and weave into that process, especially within the first week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, that you think, a lot of folks aren't paying attention to or is often missed? And um, I think with this nuance being, I'm sure there are some folks you work with who have some of these underlying challenges, but I would imagine many folks who are coming to you are not just coming because they're like, I'm depressed and I want to feel better. There's probably a sort of larger mission or vision that may be associated with that interest in working with psychedelics. So how does your integration process support what I would call that exploratory mindset? That
Mhm.
capacity to see new choices, that ability to be re-empowered, that ability to take back agency and sort of own the story of our lives. Like, kind of how are you approaching that integration process to support these leaders and high performers and other folks who don't just fit this bill of, well, I want to do MDMA therapy for PTSD, or, I want to do psilocybin for depression or alcoholism or whatever it is. Talk to us a little bit more about kind of how you hold that.
Yeah, it's interesting that you talked about, like, owning your story and agency. So before you even come for retreat, there's coaching. So anybody that comes to us, there's at least 8 weeks of coaching that and 4 like bookends. So 4 before you get there in preparation and 4 after. And then there's the option, of course, to do more than that. And then we do deeper containers, which are actually like year-long journeys with people, individuals and couples and even small teams. And so one of the first things in the prep is talking about personal agency, owning your life. Like I teach 4 levels of personal responsibility, like moving out of victim consciousness and like really understanding that you are the captain of the ship. So that's literally day 1. and and then there's 3 subsequent sessions, and actually, that program was called Be the Work, which is how the book took its name. So predates the book, but that it just lended itself nicely to and made all the sense in the world for me for that to be the book. But in terms on the other end, after the experience, because this is the part that I think the entire psychedelic field is getting wrong. So I've guided like close to 2,000 experiences at this point, and I'm here to say that this ceremony is the doorway. It's never the destination. Like, the whole point of the medicine is to get you to the integration, like, full stop. And I think that people in this space, which is exploding now, which is great and a little scary, it's a bit Wild West, like we were talking about before. I think that people are maybe learning how to work with the medicine, but not learning how to be with the person the next day and the next week and the next year, right? It's like we open up and then there's not really a lot of people who are very skilled at holding people through that journey. And that is the most important, that and safety are the most important things. Um, so we do a lot of support on the back end, and that takes, it's a different shape for everybody. So obviously with the neuroplasticity and the window, for the 2 to 4 weeks of after your experience is like where you have the opportunity to truly rewire these your brain, like these patterns that have been running your whole life, some of them that you didn't even know. I certainly didn't know the pattern that was running my whole life until I had my medicine experience, and then it became clear, but then my real work was what I did with that after. And so that stays with me, and that's how I carry people through their experiences, right? Like, you have this incredibly opening breakthrough, but then what I always say is the follow through is what you do with it at home. Like, Eden's the breakthrough, what you do at home is the follow through, and that is the integration, and really, using those 4 weeks, 2 to 4 weeks afterward, but it doesn't stop there, right? This is like a beautiful journey of your life, like the most meaningful project you'll ever work on in your life is yourself, and I'm even, reticent to call it a project because you're a person, not a project, but I think you get what I mean. So, yeah, it's super important, and it's something that I think is being very missed. I think there's a lot of hype around the medicine and, the ceremony or that peak experience, but for me, that cheapens what the medicine is actually about, and it really robs you of what is possible when the full experience with heavy integration is becomes the standard.
And how have you seen then psychedelic work help move a high performer out of maybe victim consciousness into full agency? Because when I think of high performers or leaders or founders, I would imagine many are already naturally pretty autonomous and maybe they have a certain degree of agency. But how does psychedelic work in particular help kind of move them beyond just the me, my, I to more of an agency that's about being in service rather than just what can I get out of life for myself sort of thing? Like, I'm curious kind of what you've noticed or observed
Yeah.
in that context.
Yeah, of course, and I'm sure, you know this, and I'm sure your listeners know this, that often what is occasioned in ceremony is this feeling of connection, right? That there's like we're all connected, even like people talk about the mycelium network and how that's like emblematic of how we're connected, right? Everything is intertwined, and so we can then move from just I to the we. And actually, Doug, who was my partner for many years, romantically, and then also we co-founded Eden together. We were at dinner before we we started Eden, and I wrote on a napkin the word illness, ILLNESS, and I crossed off the I and wrote we, and it becomes wellness. And that literally was like the moment we were like, we need to build that. We need to build that. And that moves somebody, like those experiences where you start to see how connected you are to other people, like whether that's in a group retreat where you can literally feel the people around you in a whole new way, or even if it's your own journey, but you drop in to a space that just illuminates to you humanity and the beauty of that, the richness of being connected to something larger than yourself. You can't unsee that. And so people are changed, right? And so then the work is like, okay, what do I do with now what I have become aware of? Like, what do I do and be with that? And a lot of times people then can move into more generosity, more conscious capitalism. They start leading in a very different way. Like they become more open. They become better listeners, right? They notice like I mean, my dissertation and my doctorate was on organizational culture and job satisfaction, and the perception of the people at the different levels of their leaders, and the disparity between how the leaders thought they were being perceived versus how the human capital of their organization actually saw them, and how that disparity equate like was heavily correlated to job satisfaction, which hits things like turnover rate and lawsuits and productivity and how loyal people are to their companies. And that's what I mean when I say like it really hits the bottom line. And so when you become a better leader because you just become a more whole human, people notice that. Like companies notice that, and you can pay people as much as you think that you can, but they're going to work a lot harder for you if they actually feel a true bonded connection. Like that's what builds the loyalty even more than the paycheck. And so I've seen people transform completely from like I and achieve, and what can present oftentimes is like narcissistic tendencies into way more generosity and generative, and a marked difference in how they show up and lead.
And I noticed that when I was reviewing your website, you do coaching and advising in like corporate settings and in business settings as well. And so I'd be curious to hear you riff on that a little bit more, as a lot of these leaders and high performers are coming in and doing psychedelic work and then going back into jobs or, starting new companies. Like,
Yep.
how do you want to hold them to this sort of greater vision, if you will, right? Like, what is it that you want to bring into the space for them? How can being the work, if you will, actually change the way we do business, change the way that we work together, right? Like change the way that we collaborate? Because I imagine, especially in the wake of AI and everything that's bringing up, I imagine you've given some thought and attention to this in the last year or two, right? Like, how might all of this psychedelic ceremony work and especially the integration that's provided after actually impact the way that people show up professionally?
Yeah. So, well, it starts with you, right? So, how you're showing up
Right.
even for yourself, right? Because if you can start to show up for yourself, listening more to yourself, having more compassion for yourself, having more patience for yourself, then your outer world matches that. So then you're able to show up as a more compassionate leader, a better listener. You're a more patient person. You can catch your reactivity and instead choose to respond, right? The Viktor Frankl, right? That moment between stimulus and response, like that space is your superpower, right? Like that ellipsis. And so like learning your patterns, seeing where you've been reactive, and tending to that, healing that within yourself, because your inner and outer world match. If you're at war with yourself inside, you are going to show up as a highly conflicted person on the outside with your colleagues, with your partners, with your family, with your kids, with your friends, with life. Right. So when we can get to this place that feels like a lot more open, spacious, there's more peace here, we bring that energy into every room that we walk into. And as leaders, it's really important because you want to lead by example. That's the most powerful way to teach anything, right? It's not didactic or training manuals or it's none of that. It's like, who are you showing up? Like you're the example of that for people that work with and for you and for your kids, right? One of the most beautiful gifts I think doing this work are parents and the way that their relationships with their kids transform. It's just such a blessing. Such a blessing. Yeah, oh, the AI, you asked about the AI stuff. So I've had people ask me like, "Are you worried that AI is gonna take over what you do?" And I was like, which like, which part are we talking about?" Because I think AI is amazing. I think there's a lot of utility. I think there's great things. I don't know a ton about it to, like, really speak. It's not my, area of expertise by any means, but I use it. I can see the value in it. I can see some danger around it too. But in terms of, is it gonna, like, take my job? 100% no. Like, because I feel like when I work, and my hope is that when other practitioners are working, like, what is happening is, like, 2 to be scientific, like, 2 nervous systems are coming together, right? And if and I feel like we have a responsibility if we're keepers of the medicine or holders of the space that we need to be in a very regulated, safe nervous system so that we have that to offer those who work with us and that there's mirroring that happens there because they can feel that. You're not going to have that from AI, right? Like you can get all the information, but then we all have the same information. So then it's like, okay, like what is it uniquely about you that is yours? Right? And that's very subjective and personal and that often is your gift like, how are you like, what is your journey? What is your story? What makes you different? And because now with AI, everyone's sharing everything. I mean, I see people post stuff all the time. I'm like, they literally sound like echoes of each other. Everybody's sounding the same. And so it's like, okay, well, what your point of differentiation is like the truth of who you are. And so that's what I'm interested in is helping people unlock and uncover that. And that's only done through my mind, my experience, and hundreds of people at this point is only done by untangling and unpattern, unwinding those things to strip back to like, who are you? And then bringing that forward, which also then gives the invitation to those around you to be able to do the same thing. And that's when you have like exponential growth. I mean, that's when companies like take off. Companies and sports teams, because I've worked with pro athletes too. So same mechanism.
Yeah, kind of deconditioning from the externally imposed identities, touching back into the essence of who we are, sort of nourishing that seed into greater and greater growth and capacity. And I think that's what I hear you talking about when you're mentioning, the shift from human doing to human being. I mean, my sort of positive, optimistic outlook on AI is that it does take care of all the knowledge work, and knowledge work is sort of our current prison for doing. Um, and so if there's a tool that can handle that, well, then that opens up new vistas for the capacity to actually do this deeper work of soul searching, of getting back into our essence, of embodying the things that really make us human, emotion and dance and love and playfulness and music and culture. So I agree with you that it feels a little bit of like whenever I go on LinkedIn now, there's a bit of an AI psychosis because everyone more or less sounds the same because they're doing this through Claude or ChatGPT or whatever it is. So we're kind of in this course correction. But my hope is that with AI, we find just another tool that's useful for this knowledge work, this doing work, which if the governance is set up appropriately and we can be collaborative in how we navigate this, I think will open up incredible opportunities for more and more of us to simply explore what it means to be and be in relationship with one another, which is why I think, you mentioned no one's going to replace you as a nervous system or me as a nervous system or because we need to be held by humans as we go through this process of not only rediscovering ourselves, but sort of also putting ourselves back together
Mm.
in the integration phase. And
Mhm.
AI can be supportive on the edges of that, but the crux of it has to be human, and I think will remain human for sure.
Absolutely, 1,000% that. And one thing I would offer around that, the doing, because what I think I heard you say is how AI can like kind of take some of the, I don't know, the busy work maybe like off of our plate, right? That which then opens up some
Yeah.
time and space for us to then tend to like the being. And I would say, yes, that, and also you have to be very conscious of what you then choose to fill that with, right? Because nature abhors a vacuum. If there's an open space, it's going to be filled. So if you're taking things off your plate because you're now delegating that to AI and it's efficient, it's crazy efficient, and then you have extra time, then you have this space and it's like, what will I choose to fill that with? Well, if you're still running on a do have be formula, you're going to just fill it with more doings. Even if it's the doings of, you know, things that I love, like even if it's the breath work and the red light therapy and the protocols, and like you're still gonna be doing in that open space. Your doings might look different, but it's still the same chasing and grasping, which is different from actually being. Right. And so that's where we talk about the two different desires. Like, are you now filling those things with doings that you're utilizing to prove that you are enough or that you have worth? Right. Or are you doing it from a place of already knowing deeply in your bones, you're already whole, you're already enough. And then choosing from that place, because that's a very different architecture and a very different lived experience.
That's really important to emphasize. It comes back to the generative versus grasping. Be generative with that extra time. Don't just grasp to try to fill it with more filler. Basically, is what I hear you saying. So the capacity to be intentional is important.
And it's tricky because I think that our world, like whether it's psychedelic or wellness, like we're obsessed with optimizing, right? But you can't optimize worth. Okay. Like you can't optimize
Right.
worth. And so sometimes people say, okay, I just won't, focus everything outward. I'll do it inward. I was kind of saying this earlier, but then it really is, it's mimicking. It's the same machine of chasing. And it can get confusing because it can look very spiritual and it can look like, I'm doing the work and this is the stuff. But it's like, okay, the litmus test for that is like, if you weren't doing those things, how are you with yourself? Like, how are you actually feeling about the human that you are without those things? Like, because I think that tells you, okay, I'm using different filler, but I'm still using those things to kind of eject out of the being, right? Like how are you in your quiet hours when you're not doing anything? That's what I'm interested in. Because if we can find peace there, that's where we wanna start from.
That's beautifully said. Well, folks, Dr. Stefanie Klein, you can find out more about her book, Be the Work, The Shift from Human Doing to Human Being. You can pre-order on her website, which I believe is Dr. Stefanie, that's with an F, Klein, ending with an E.com. We'll post and publish the link on the website. So you can also just go to Third Wave and find it there. So drstephanieklein.com. The Sacred House of Eden is thesacredhouseofeden.com. And again, that new book is Be the Work, The Shift from Human Doing to Human Being. Stefanie, any other places you'd like to point folks or sort of final words that you'd like to share before we close?
Yeah, thank you for asking. So, I actually made a gift for your listeners. It's about a 10-minute guided meditation. It's called Already Enough, and it's great for integration, like when you start to maybe feel far from the medicine, or just great when you need to just really be reminded of everything that we're kind of talking about here today, of like that being underneath all of the striving and achieving. I think it's about 10 or 12 minutes. So I'll give you that link, Paul, so that you can share that. And then I would just offer that anyone that, if this landed for you and you're interested in exploring this, definitely check out the websites, and also, start with the book. I think that's a great place to start, like, whether you're working with psychedelics or not, like, it's definitely not a book about psychedelics, they're woven throughout, because they're woven throughout my life, but, it's whether you're psychedelic curious or, you've been at this for a long time or you would never explore psychedelics, like, I would say, any of those camps, like, start with the book, and yeah, and just thank you to you, Paul. I've said this when I was with you in Malibu. I just really appreciate the way that you're doing what you're doing and how you're showing up in this space, and I wish we had more of you. I have a lot of respect and, appreciation for you, so thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. It was great to finally do this. Folks, make sure you check out Stephanie's new book, Be the Work, The Shift from Human Doing to Human Being, and also her work at the Sacred House of Eden. And Stephanie, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It was great to have you on.
Thank you.